Under the strong influence of Louis XIV's aesthetics, he imposed upon his courtiers not only his exacting expectations for the appearance of the palace and its grounds, but also an equal expectation for the appearance of courtiers themselves. For example, Louis XIV required his male court officials to wear specific clothing for specific occasions. For example, at the dinner table, they were required to wear their hats. As a result of the tight and elaborate nature of their clothing, mealtime at the Palace of Versailles was often uncomfortable. Moreover, through his establishment of an association between French identity and fashion by promoting French textile industries, Louis XIV demonstrated his commitment to supporting French artisans. So important was this to him that he famously burned his son's clothing for being made of non-French textiles. While millions of images exist of the Palace of Versailles, there is one aspect of the palace that none have yet to successfully convey. The unpleasant odor was too much to bear at Versailles. To be exact, it was predominantly a fecal odor. The difference with plumbing is that only the king's rooms had it fitted out. Thus, the majority of nobles used chamber pots, while busy courtiers had nowhere to relieve themselves, and so they relieved themselves in the hallways of the palace. This meant that at any time of day or night, the palace had a horrible smell in that area. The people who lived there covered up all that by diving into perfumed scents. Louis XIV effectively turned the nobles into servants at Versailles by selecting specific high-ranking courtiers and members of the royal family to receive his royal favor for performing specific tasks, e.g., brushing his hair or carrying a candle. The tasks were strictly regulated, and no two people could do the same job. Louis XIV had a fondness for pets, particularly dogs, and he owned several Great Pyrenees dogs, which were originally bred in Spain. The palace dogs had an annual allowance of 1,446 livres, which is about $20,000 in today's money, and the royal bakers prepared special dog treats for them every day. The monarch had an affinity for animals and built a menagerie at Versailles to house a plethora of species, including elephants and flamingos. In addition to having royal pets, courtiers often encountered both domesticated and wild animals ambling about within the confines of the chateau grounds. In fact, one would likely come across lions, tigers, hyenas, bears, geese, etc. However, one animal that was not permitted in the palace was a house cat. Cat lovers were not appreciated at the palace. We stated earlier that many people lived at the Palace of Versailles. The Palace of Versailles was supported by a large service industry that employed many people who lived on site. So it came as no surprise that there were limited living spaces available for the entire working population of approximately 10,000 nobles, public officials, and staff working at the Palace of Versailles. The living accommodations were assigned based on a hierarchy of rank among the courtiers. Higher-ranking courtiers typically received larger and more luxurious accommodations than lower-ranking courtiers. The proximity of a courtier's living quarters to the king's bedroom correlated with the degree to which the courtier had access to the king and his immediate entourage. It was also possible for courtiers to gain access to higher status accommodations through political maneuvering. Because of the prestige associated with serving the king, many courtiers attempted to rise socially in hopes of obtaining better employment within the king's court. It is important to keep in mind that these better jobs were typically any of the most undignified positions within the French court. As an example, cleaning the king's chamber pot, although a menial position, was a high honor within the court. These positions were an entry-level servant position. However, getting to serve as the king's piss boy was considered a great accomplishment. Therefore, the process of competition for these types of positions was a political one. Some positions had to be purchased, while others were given to courtiers who had won favor with the king or queen. King Louis XIV came up with an ingenious plan to keep his courtiers busy during their time at Versailles by holding them hostage to a series of daily tornadoes, scheduled events, that were made up of little more than pointless ceremonial rituals and frivolous entertainment, and would prevent them from not being able to do A. Leave Versailles without the permission of the king, or B. Plot against him. It was commonplace for courtiers to spend their days at Versailles either attending elaborate dinners or watching the king perform simple tasks such as eating or bathing. Although the palace appeared to be an ostentatious establishment, its location greatly benefited the citizens living in adjoining towns who had access to its grounds. Tourists often visit Versailles and were allowed in by guards when they adhered to certain behaviors and customs. Unfortunately, some of the local peasants and nearby wanderers used their close proximity to the palace as an opportunity to frequently leave rubbish at the borders of the palace grounds. However, given the sheer number of courtiers who carted around their full chamber pots inside the palace, the filthy conditions caused by locals were relatively negligible. Due to the king's open-door policy, the palace experienced a significant influx of visitors daily. Imagine the smell. It is no surprise that France's perfume industry grew so quickly, since the royal court had constant access to and interaction with the royal family. Its members were on hand for some very personal moments in their lives. We have already discussed the details of King Louis XIV's bathroom habits way too often. But what about other examples where members of the royal family displayed vulnerability? The act of childbirth is an obvious one. Giving birth continued the family lineage, so when a baby prince or princess was scheduled to be born, the queen's delivery received a great deal of attention from the court. In fact, members of the court were in attendance at royal birthday and were often elbowing each other to get a better look. The purpose of their gathering for this event was to be certain that the baby had not been switched at birth. King Louis XIV also required his courtiers to be present when he and the queen had dinner. However, these were not any kind of special or elaborate meals. Louis was looking for attention from his imperial subjects. In Versailles, the entire existence of Louis XIV could be seen through the Grand Couvert, which was the public meal of the king and his family before an audience. He served lavish dinners, which consisted primarily of meat such as pigeons, partridges, and truffle chickens. Courtiers and other royal guests had to stand throughout the entire time of the Grand Couvert, ensuring that they did not overthrow the king as they watched him eat his dinner of roasted pigeon. The Palace of Versailles, like other resorts, was filled with beauty and splendor when the climate was good. A visit during summer could be enjoyed in the gardens filled with flowers and trees. Aside from the pungent odors of human waste and garbage left by the locals, they were breathtakingly beautiful. However, in the winter, it couldn't be said. Winter brought freezing temperatures, which left courtiers freezing in poorly insulated rooms. The sheer size of the palace caused such issues as fireplaces could not adequately provide heat to any of the rooms. One visitor recalled in 1695, "So cold is it above the king's table that both wine and water have frozen in the glasses." Did you believe Gatsby had wild parties? You should know, Gatsby parties pale in comparison to the types of parties that King Louis hosted. The king had various types of parties virtually every day. One of the earliest large-scale entertainment gatherings held at Versailles was called the Delights of the Enchanted Island. This week-long celebration, which began in 1664, marked the official kickoff to construction of the Château de Versailles, and the purpose of this event was to expose all those who would be affected by the construction: Louis's wife and mother, Louis's girlfriends and mistresses, as well as other family members, with what was planned for the future of the chateau. In many ways, this event served as Louis's welcome to the neighborhood party. The festivities consisted of races, lavish banquets, theatrical performances by Molière, during which he premiered his works La Princesse d'Élide and Tartuffe. To summarize, the delights of the Enchanted Island party was essentially a combination of the Kentucky Derby, Thanksgiving dinner, and an opening night on Broadway. What do you think about being a courtier at Versailles? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our Forgotten Realms.